Hi, guys. It is 4 o'clock in the morning, and I am back with another episode of What's My 100%. It's so funny. I was thinking right before I pressed record how much, for whatever reason, I get these pulls to do the podcast quite often when I wake up at like 3 a.m. And I think there's certainly an element of the world is quiet and I have some space, but also just that there's something about what comes to us, I think, a lot of times in the quiet hours of the middle of the night. And hi, everybody. It feels good to be back recording. I needed a little bit of time to sort of synthesize how I want to speak to some things that have been alive, and now I'm feeling like I have a lot of clarity around a few episodes that I feel pulled to record and some things that I feel compelled to speak about. But it's interesting. I think in so many different facets of my life, will go through periods where I need to be a little bit in hermit mode and contemplation. And then when it feels time, then it's like, okay, now there's something that I have to offer based on what I've come to alchemize or understand in that space. And I think that's true oftentimes of us collectively. I think certainly seasonally, there will be a way that I think we're starting to understand it becomes important to be in touch with rhythms of our nature and really present, excuse me, to what we are being asked to pay attention to, just in ways that I think we are starting to remember. And maybe we had been socially conditioned to forget for a while, right? So, all that being said, I feel like there's a little bit of a fire in my belly to talk about some things and to start a dialogue. And I think in many ways, I'm hungry to not be just another voice sort of adding to what can feel a little bit noisy right now to me. And I know I'm not the only one who feels this way, but how do we start to actually be in conversation with one another and attempt to hear one another? And so, what I want to talk about today was something that I felt so deeply activated by, you guys, that I needed to take a minute to think about what I wanted to say about this activation point. So, I'm going to tell you guys what happened. I was scrolling on social media, as we do, and it was maybe a little over a week ago now, but I saw, and I'm going to be specific about the content without specific about the content creator, because I think the exact words that were said matter in this case, right? So this was a content creator who was actually a therapist, as you know, as I don't know, I was about to say as I am, but it's complicated in itself, right? Not that I'm not a therapist, but there's a lot about this is the conversation, right? There's a lot about what has been shifting in terms of the way that I have been holding this work and sort of the colonized perspectives around healing that are starting to feel less aligned with what I feel a pull to be doing and, offering to the collective. And so that's why I hesitated, but I don't want to digress too far in that direction. But anyway, so this content creator is a therapist and had a post that said the exact words: "Why I hate Mel Robbins and her stupid effing let them theory, and you should too." Those are the words that started off the reel. Now here's the thing. I have been in this experience of creating content for social media for a few years as someone who, has worked as a therapist, and certainly the personal development field has become its own cultural zeitgeist. Really, it's, there's a whole industry around wellness influencers and therapy influencers and people who are utilizing the work that they do in the world to expand their platform. I don't think that's at all a bad thing. I think it can be a beautiful thing. I think there are shadow elements of that, as there are shadow elements of everything. And that's a little bit what I want to talk about, because I think there's a way that we have to be so mindful of, even if we're not thinking about the intentionality behind whatever it is we're doing, I think we have to think that there could be outcomes that are so much bigger than even what we are wrapping our heads around, in that we are sometimes contributing to an energetic frequency that is having a larger impact on who we are becoming and what the potential outcomes are for us as a human race. And I'm saying this so intentionally because I really thought a lot about it, right? And let's slow down a bit and break down that statement and listen. I understand that there is a very, what's the word? Like a very tangible strategy and I was going to say lucrative strategy, but I don't even think it's about like it being lucrative. I don't actually think it's about the money behind it. I mean, it certainly is when we think about like in the long term, as your account gets more engagement, that could mean more opportunities and things of that nature. But I think it's just, I saw something else a few months ago that said the creators of these platforms, these social media platforms, have realized that there is something that is more engaging for the human psyche than all of these other forms of stimulation, sex, power, all of these other forms. And it is rage. It is feeling the power of the righteousness and the anger. And they are really aware of what happens when we create vacuums of divide and when we create a shared enemy for people in a way that, we are on the right side of something that we believe is wrong. And again, that to me does not come without a cost. And I think we have to be so mindful of the cost. And so I understand that this is, and what's crazy is I just peeked at that same post that I'm talking about before I started recording. At the time that I looked at it, it has 100,000 likes. It has so much engagement on this post that literally starts off, why I hate another human being, and you should too. I understand that Mel Robbins has sold quite a few copies of her book, The Let Them Theory. I do not know Mel Robbins, and so I cannot speak to her character, how she shows up with and around other people, whether people, I was going to say, may be justified in hating this human being. I don't really know that it ever is super supportive of anything to hate another human being. We can certainly feel that another human being and the way they move through the world is not aligned with who we want to be in connection to. We can certainly feel like challenged by people's actions. Absolutely. But to me, words are potent, words are spells, and hate is an incredibly charged word for me and not something that I feel towards another human. Now, again, I'm not saying my truth has to or needs to be anyone else's truth, but I do think that the dehumanization of someone who I'm going to assume, and I actually know this content creator, so I'm going to assume that actually he does not know Mel Robbins, because I don't think if he knew her or was friendly with her, he would create a reel saying that he hates this human being. But I think that there's just something that is so disconnected from the fact that, people sell a lot of books or have a large platform, and we can really wrap our heads around the fact that they are no longer human beings. And that's just not the case. I was thinking, what happens if she sees that post? And I understand that, like, getting more comfortable with being divisive and people not liking you is a part of the game. I understand that that's what you sign up for when you put yourself out there in a public way, right? It's that thing. It's like, it's super easy to criticize the doer of deeds and the person who dares to stand in the space of vulnerability. My stomach just growled really loudly. And there's just the part of me. And I think I probably, if I'm honest about my shadowy elements of why this was so activating for me, it's because I think as someone who, you know, has felt socially awkward in the past and is incredibly introverted, I think what sort of held me back from allowing myself to be seen or speak to things that I felt strongly about in the past was the fear, really, of this type of exile and isolation and judgment and just hurtful commentary, if I'm honest. And so I think that part of me, maybe that young part of me that hates the idea of being judged, and certainly have done a lot of my own work around that, but I think it just really pains me to see anyone else being sort of like in a space where collectively people are coming for that person in that way. And so, yeah, I want to talk a little bit about, well, let's start talking about Mel Robbins and like this let them theory and why it's so divisive, because to me, I think that's important. And for anyone who's not familiar with Mel Robbins' let them theory, I actually have not read that book. But I've watched her in several podcasts, and I actually really agree with a lot of what she's saying. I think anyone who knows me would not be super surprised to hear that. Now, I have heard the criticism that I think the woman's name, oh, forgive me, is Lacey Phillips. I don't know, but that she's a woman of color and that she was the original author of the let them idea. And so I think a lot of the criticism that I've heard people give or offer, and it was a poem, I guess, the let them idea, and that, you know, I think a lot of people have sort of said the book is plagiarized and it's not an original idea. Now, listen, hear that, and original ideas are like, that's a big conversation, you guys, because there is a collective unconscious. There is a vibrational frequency of intellect that I think we will have the same ideas, right? So I think this thing of like that, maybe, I don't know, that's tough for me. And I think the idea of like letting people be who they are doesn't feel like that much of like an original thought to me. I think it's deeply rooted in Buddhist psychology. I think there's a lot of ways that I certainly speak to something similar. You know, I often quote Ayanna Van Zant and her phrasing that I love so much, which is, I don't get to tell people how to love me. I just get to decide if I want to participate in the way that they love. And so that is something that certainly I was inspired by her speaking that, but so much of why that idea and that framework for understanding what we are and are not in control of relationally came from sitting with couples for many years and watching the extent to which the majority of our suffering, from my perspective, comes from our desire to control the uncontrollable, which is another human being and how they choose to move through the world, right? Now, this content creator, in his feedback on Mel Robbins' let them theory, was saying it's just minimizing and sort of, you know, suggest that we should cut people off and negates the nuance of what is required in order to be in relationships. It's not relational. And I would say, first of all, that feels like, to me, and I'm going to say this so intentionally, a desperate attempt to misunderstand what someone is saying. Because I think if you've heard her talk about her book and her theory or her way of experiencing what she's saying, she also says there's like the let them and the let me aspect of what she's saying. But it's like really about letting people be who they are and then deciding how I'm going to interact, right? But that I think it's really the theory, what she's saying to me is about personal responsibility, which is something that I speak about ad nauseum. And I think so much of the codependent nature of our societal construct really is in resistance to the idea that we don't get to control other people to create a sense of internal safety. I really believe that's why people have such strong feelings of rejection around that, right? Because my power resides in the illusion that I can ever get people to change when that's not something that they are interested in doing or have a buy-in around. And I'm sorry, you guys, that's the story I'm sticking to, and I'm happy to be in conversation around that. But to me, the larger thing, and I want to be so clear with my perspective on this, I don't think this content creator is a quote bad person. I would never dislike them. I think it is that person, well, two things, maybe in sort of the experience of being disconnected from myself and from my soul. And I'm saying that so intentionally. Your soul doesn't hate another person because they feel something that you don't agree with. That's just not who we are in our essence. Now, someone might say, Danae, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. You're taking it too seriously. It was probably a tongue-in-cheek thing. And I would say we have gotten so far away from our understanding of what is sacred and how we are sacred to one another and what it means to hold one another that way, that it matters to me. I truly believe, we have leaders in this world that we are saying it's just not okay to be behaving as leaders in a way that we would not encourage our children to behave. But I think when you have a platform, that's a form of leadership. I think if you are speaking into the cultural zeitgeist and have the ear of a million people, which this content creator does, that matters. If we are sort of being a part of how we come back into connection and collaboration and empathy for one another versus how we create more othering and divisiveness and polarization. And I don't think hating anyone and encouraging other people to hate someone is really the stance that a leader takes. I think there is a way that, the engagement and what riles people up and, creates conflict even. And I've heard this content creator and other content creators, frankly, speak to the fact that personal responsibility is not what keeps people engaged. Well, I would disagree because look how many books Mel Robbins has sold, right? But also that, people love to have a villain to sort of get behind being against. And they love to fight with one another in the comments. And so, what is that? Like, no press is bad press. It's that thing of like, even if they're arguing with you, they're engaging with you. And that's a positive thing. And I would say, to what end? I just wonder sometimes if we are selling our souls for engagement. And that's been a little bit of why I feel like I've stepped back a little bit and needed some time around how I want to show up on these platforms, because I've just been paying attention to what has become an increased level of toxicity and polarization. And what I believe is by design disconnecting us from our humanity in a way that I think we are not paying enough attention to, guys. Real talk. And it matters now like it never has before, because I believe that there is an agenda to sort of hypnotize us into handing over the aspects of what make us human and magical and divine, and replace all of that with technology, and us living in a trance where we don't notice that we have been sort of removed from our human essence. And so, yeah, I guess this is me wanting to put my 2 cents in on something that I've just felt a little bit saddened by. I'm not going to lie. I felt really sad when I saw that post, mostly because I wanted to sit with that content creator and just say, my love, you're better than this. I understand that it might feel good to create something that, has a lot of attention and gets a lot of engagement and people have a strong response to. And I did that. It can feel really like phenomenal cosmic powers, right? And oof, I think there's going to come a time very soon where all of us are going to sort of say, how did we get here? If we don't really take responsibility for changing course, there's a quickening happening with the way things are shifting in terms of our collective consciousness and the way that the world around us is shifting. And I really think this inflection point that we're at is asking us to wake up and understand that it is time to return to the space of our divinity and the remembrance of how powerful we are when we're in that space of our true essence, which is love, which is connection, which is compassion and empathy. These are human things that can't be outsourced to technology. And certainly that is true of the rage and the division and the polarization. But I would say those things can be outsourced and certainly cultivated in some distorted ways. But the aspects of really feeling into one another and really feeling what is sacred about one another, those are things that are uniquely human. And I think they matter so very much. So that's my thoughts on that. I pulled a card from one of my favorite tarot decks, and it's the Muse Tarot, which is just the most beautiful deck. If you're ever looking for a tarot deck to start your journey into tarot, sometimes I will suggest this one to clients because I think it's so beautiful and poetic, and it really just, I think, brings you into the space of magic in a way that feels undeniable. And I think that this is where I feel compelled to head now, to finish off 2025 and certainly in 2026. I feel like I gave myself permission, or just like I had this recognition maybe a week or two ago, that as the feminine consciousness is expanding, and I believe it is, so much of what I want to do is just give myself permission to play and to have fun with all of the things that I'm creating, like put down the serious. And while it may seem that this is a serious conversation that we've been talking about for the last 25 minutes, what I think is that, yes, it is serious and that it matters, but I think the solution becomes love and play and connection and collaboration, and that like we don't have to shame one another or be in the space of villainizing one another. I think there's something so powerful about what the healthy feminine essence is when it is in right relationship with what it is as an energetic, that just becomes this space of like our divinity, and you belong, and let's come up with a creative solution that doesn't have to engage our fear and our survival strategies, right? Like, what would it look like if we believed in our propensity to show up in our divinity? I absolutely know that it is possible and it changes everything. I've experienced so much of it. And I think the more that I believe in it, the more that I experience it. And that's what I want for all of us. And what I think is the invitation from life and the universe for us right now is to just say, how do we tap into the magic as sort of the antidote to the fear? Because there's a lot of fear right now, you guys. I think we all feel that so clearly. I don't need to tell you, but dominance cannot drive out dominance. Hate cannot drive out hate. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. And only love can meet fear with an energetic that is more potent and powerful from my perspective. So the card I pulled was the Ace of Emotions. This card is so beautiful. I have to show you guys. You see that? On YouTube. Okay, so I'm going to read the description. Ace of Emotions, keywords, new relationships, exciting new feelings emerging, compassion and creativity, emotional intelligence, and the intuition of the heart. A time to connect with any repressed emotions, healing, unblocking creativity. Prompt is reading your heart waves. This watery ace is as fluid as the seaweed that dances and sways with the currents. She is always bubbling with new feelings brought to life underneath the mirrored surface of her creative shores. Here is a creativity of the heart, an intelligence guided by emotion. She creates new perceptions and awareness of all the magical connections that contain the genesis of loving relationships. She does this through healing, blending, introducing, and taking the plunge toward love each and every time. She invites you to the depths of her tide, to swim in her healing waters and emerge at the surface of your truth, where she will open up the rivers of new affinities and experiences. Beautiful new heart connections are on their way. So helpless am I to resist, so eager am I to insist, and willfully I swim into the sea of new with nothing more than my open heart and my pockets filled with hope for that which the tides will bring. I love this deck because it ends with a poem after the description of each card, and the poetry is always just really moving to me. But I think what I'm excited for is possibility of ushering in a new era that is rooted in love and collaboration and connection in all forms. You know, we're so sort of conditioned to think of love as romantic and beautiful. Love the romantic love. I know, such a lover. And I think we need to expand our perception of what we're talking about when we talk about meeting things in the space of love. And I don't know, I think there's just an exhaustion. I know I'm not the only one who feels with the level of othering and, you know, my side, your side, this gender, that gender, this group, that group. It's just enough now. What would it look like to try to stop speaking life into what we don't want and start speaking life into what we want to create? That to me is the conversation that I'm interested in. Like, I think we have identified the problem ad nauseum. And listen, I've been there and a part of, like, we need to discuss and identify what have been aspects of some of these templates that have been distorted and problematic. And it's not that does not have its place, but at some point, you know, Nicole Daedone, who's someone whose work has really been impactful for me, talks about liberation has two wings, right? And it's liberation, freedom from, and freedom to. And if we're just solely focused on the wing of freedom from, we're not creating anything. That is the space of destruction and stagnation and a lack of possibility and hope. We have to also be just as invested in what we want to create. So it's not enough to just say, this is the problem. This is what I hate. This is, what is wrong with whatever this is. Our work really becomes about identifying ourselves so we can speak life into. And so, what is the alternative that I feel like I want to take responsibility for creating in the world? Because it's actually super easy to be in the space of identifying what's wrong and criticizing where the doer of deeds is doing it wrong and, not taking responsibility for, and here's what I see as another way. I think it's really easy to criticize someone like Mel Robbins putting energy into creating something in the world that has been supportive of her path, as I've heard her speak to. And I think, not aligning with that or feeling like I disagree with that as the path, beautiful. But what do you want to create as an alternative, right? What do you think is the better way that you have found when someone is not showing up in the way that you would like them to? Like, it's not let them, it's control them, it's force them. Like, what is the alternative? I think it becomes important to identify that just as much, right? So yeah, I love pulling the ace of emotions because it's like the emergence of possibility and creativity and life force and love for this life that we're living. And I think we need more of that. There's just so much, the thing about hopelessness is it just becomes really devoid of the wonder, right? I think when we're in this space of disappointment and feeling entitled to certain things being different than they are, or even judgment around what is, we're really disconnected from curiosity and wonder and the space of what might be possible if we think about things in creative ways. And I'm always so struck by just the leaders of different movements. I often draw from the civil rights movement as a source of inspiration when I think about when things have been really painful and divided and could conceivably feel hopeless. And I'm so struck by the leaders during that time period and how they really rooted into their imaginal space, which is their feminine. So we're clear. But just saying, like, if there are buses that do not allow people the dignity of sitting in a seat as if they were a human being, let's organize a boycott of these buses and figure out creative solutions for how to get where we need to get. And I just think we need more creative solutions versus more criticism of what is, because that doesn't do anything at a certain point. Like, yes, we need to identify, right? Like freedom from, but like at some point we need the freedom towards the earth that we really want to leave our children, you guys. And I feel like it's time for all of us to evoke our inner adult. And even as I say that, it becomes evoking our inner adult from this feminine consciousness of possibility and expansion and creativity. So it's just a very different way of approaching how we meet this moment. And I know that we are capable. So this is me calling us all in to the space of possibility. Thank you for spending some time with me this morning. It is now 5 a.m. See, and I'll be back soon because I have some more topics to connect with you guys on. But I appreciate you being here. Be well.